This is a Geek Leader podcast, and I'm your host, John Rauda. This show is all about helping us grow as leaders, become better technologists, and improve our lives both at work and at home. I hope you enjoy the show and learn a lot. Welcome to a Geek Leader podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda. And if you could, please do me a favor and take a moment and leave a rating and review in whatever podcast player you're listening to this on, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, doesn't matter. I would greatly appreciate it. And that feedback really helps get other listeners to the show. Also, if you're not subscribed, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And if you feel so inclined, you can go to geekleader.com/tip and donate to the show. Thanks so much. All right, Geek Leaders, today I'm honored to have Antonio Garrido on the show. He is the author of My Daily Leadership, which is one of 3 books that he's written. He's also a serial entrepreneur, founder of many companies. But we're going to be talking about leadership today and what are some things that we as high-performing leaders can do to become even better. Anyway, with all that being said, Antonio, welcome to the show.
Thank you, John. That was a nice introduction, and I do appreciate the invitation. I'm a fan of the podcast, so thank you for the invite. I'm excited.
Yeah, so if you don't mind, just to give some context for people listening, tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into doing what you're doing and why you decided to get into writing.
Well, that's a good question. So I'll try and keep it reasonably short. I am telling you now, I'll fail because it's normally interesting only to be in my mum. But when I came out of university a million years ago, because I'm ancient, I was an architect, right? So I was an architect, not working for any particularly large organizations, just pretty bog standard run-of-the-mill architect. But I was fortunate enough to meet one of the amazing leaders that I worked for in my career. So I met this chap on a hotel building site that was going to be a hotel that I was working on and his organization was working on. And anyway, so he offered me a job, like practically on the spot, which was, I thought, unusual, to head the architecture department that he was trying to set up, but was kind of struggling to do so. So, I thought, why not just give it a whirl? That really kind of devalues all of the consideration that went into it, but ultimately it boiled down to, let's give it a whirl. So, and I then discovered that this chap was just a really, really forward-thinking, really incisive, inspirational leader. Anyway, so I worked for him for a few years. After a couple of years, he asked me if I wanted to go into leadership rather than architecture, which I wondered whether I wonder now, but didn't then. But oftentimes, I think he's dead now, but oftentimes would wonder, is it because I wasn't a very good architect? That's probably, anyway. So the organization then paid for me to go back to university to do an MBA in strategic business management and so on. And he put me in charge of Europe, which he had no right to do so because I wasn't at all ready for it. But anyway, there you are. And worked for him for ages. And then, John, more by look than design, I then found myself in a series of roles over time, because as I mentioned, working for one tremendous, just outstandingly good leader after another. And really, it's not because I designed it that way. I ended up running what you might call 6 Fortune 60 companies, very, very big companies, thousands of employees, billions in revenue. So I did that for a while. And then my brother was the CFO of a company called AstraZeneca, which is a pharmaceutical company, and he was looking after South America out of Miami. So every time I'd go to a board meeting in Dallas, we were talking about Dallas earlier, but I went to a board meeting in Dallas, I would swing by Miami and see my brother and my nephew. They're not round the corner, but from London, it's just round the corner. So my wife and I were about to be empty nesters, so we decided we'd go and live in Miami just for, giggles. So, but your government doesn't like foreigners to just show up. So I had to somehow justify that. So I bought a company in Miami. I was going to buy a pool cue company because I thought that sounded rather sexy and avant-garde. But then I didn't buy a pool cue company in the end. I bought a sales training company, and we grew that over 12 years to be probably the third largest in the world. And that's when I wrote my first book. But anyway, I digress. Back to this book, right?
Yeah.
This book is all about, well, at its heart, at its very root, it's about emotional intelligence, leadership and emotional intelligence, self-awareness, and all of that. That's built around a principle of reflective and reflexive practice and journaling. So one of those very enlightened leaders that I mentioned earlier years ago asked me whether or not I journaled. And I said no, that I didn't journal. And then he asked me why. And I said, well, yeah, plus probably because I'm not a 16-year-old Victorian schoolgirl. And so I didn't at that time realize what the benefits of doing so might be. So, he suppressed a smile and said, well, why don't you go and find 10 of the most successful people you can find in any walk of life, in any industry, and just who you think is super successful. However you measure that, we'll talk about that later, perhaps, John. But however you measure that, and connect with them and ask them whether or not they journal. And I said, okay, right. Now, if you Googled, and, there are other search engines available, but if you Google, something like the benefits of journaling, you get something like 2 billion hits in a nanosecond, right? And I kind of like, I had to accept that maybe I was wrong and 2 other billion people are right? So I called and contacted these successful individuals. And by the time I got to 8 and every one of them said yes, I thought, well, maybe there's something in this. So then when I started the business in Miami, I started talking about journaling a lot because it really helped me. It helped everybody that worked for me from a senior leadership position right the way down. So I'm just talking specifically leadership development, management development journaling, not a to-do list, not, there's lots of different kinds of journal, not bullet point journaling, not, story of life. Go ahead.
Let me ask you this. So when you talk about journaling, what do you mean exactly? Like just recording the events of the day? Do you talk about like things you did right, things you didn't do right, bad conversations that you could have taken a different direction, but you didn't, or how?
Yeah, closer to the second than the first, because what happened when I then did this kind of pseudo semi research, spoke to 8 people that I thought were super successful, asked them if they journaled, they all said yes. And then I went back to my chairman of the group. I was like, okay, I'm sold. All right, so maybe I should journal. So what do I journal? And that's one of the first things that people say to us. They say, well, I would journal if I knew what to write and how often to write and when to write. And can you give me some help? So I said to him, so can you give me some help? He said, yeah. So he said, well, first of all, just write down 100 things that you're grateful for, right? So I thought, well, surely I don't have to do this every day. And he went, no, you don't, just once so that you can refer to it. This is his journaling. By the way, it's not out. That's not where we're now at, but this is how I started. So I wrote down 100 things I was grateful for. And he said, you can't have a positive life if it's filled with negativity, right? So every time you feel a bit low, you go to this list and it picks you up. I said, okay, that makes sense. So I wrote down 100 things. He said, can I have a look at it? And I showed him and said, yeah, that's pretty good. He said, now write down 100 things that you want. So I said, what, anything? So he said, yeah, anything that you want, anything. And like, fly business class, we were talking about that earlier as well, only wear handmade Italian shoes, whatever it is, 100 things you want. So I wrote that down, right? And showed him that list. He said, yeah, good list. He said, now write down 100 things you need. And I got to about 16. I couldn't get any more. So I went back to him and said, I'm really struggling with this list. He said, yeah, that's because you don't need nearly as many things as you think that you need, right? I said, okay. He said, that's first lesson. I said, okay, great. Love it. What's my next lesson? He said, well, have you earned your money today and did you do your best? And I went, yeah. He said, okay, well, what makes you say that? I said, well, I was the first one in. I worked all day. I had this meeting. I did all of this good stuff and made progress here and moved the flag down the beach here and da-da-da-da-da. So yeah, I've earned my money today. He said, fantastic. He said, the answer to that should always be yes. He said, if you're 3 days on the trot and you think that you haven't earned your money today, he said, come see me, we'll have a chat. So, okay. So, and I knew it was a difficult question because he was the guy that paid me every month. Decided who gets good car parking spots in the car park. So then he said, and did you do your best today? I said, yeah. He said, well, what makes you say that? I said, well, I did this and this and this and this and this. He said, yeah, that's not your best. I said, yeah, I think it is. He said, no, there's a difference, between work ethic and commitment. I said, okay, is there? So he said, yeah, work ethic is work really hard. And I'm like, very hard, and I know you work hard. I see your output, I see what you do. You work hard. I said, but are you committed? So, well, what's the difference? He said, well, I know people think there's virtue in work ethic, but commitment is doing the things that you have to do that maybe you don't want to do, right? No growth in your comfort zone, no comfort in your growth zone, and all of that kind of stuff. And he said, and by the way, what's best? I said, well, best is doing your best. I said, yeah, think of a 100-meter distance runner. I am answering your question, John, I promise. He said, 100-meter distance runner. Every day, what do they do every day, first of all? Well, of course, they train and get better, and they talk to their coach, and they're constantly trying to raise the bar. They said, but they don't run a personal best every single day, do they? I go, well, no, not every day. So I said, no. So doing your best every day is impossible. Trying your best, that's a different thing. But every day, did you earn your money today? And did you try your best? Did you do your best? And he said, and what that is that that's reflected practice, just to answer your question. So one of the things that we have all of our leaders do at the end of the day is just fill in their leadership report card. What would they give themselves for today? Like an A+, an A, an A-, a B+, right? That starts to build this principle of self-awareness. Because unless you have self-awareness, you can't, well, first of all, EQ's down the toilet, but you can't get better. I did a talk just before COVID broke. I went to the Super Bowl final, the mid-February, where by the end of February, everyone had COVID. Do you remember? I got it well, I was an early adopter, and nobody knew what it was. And I was like really poorly, and so was my wife, like for ages. And they didn't know at that point what COVID was. They know now. And anyway, so I was really, really poorly. But before the Super Bowl final, I did a talk to 400 leaders from around the world. Different industries, different sizes, different vertical, different markets, everything. And I asked them, John, I said, by show of hands here, who has no leadership blind spots? And thankfully, they were all self-aware enough to recognize that they all must have had some, because nobody put their hands up. That's one of those questions where you ask a room of 400 people and you just hope that nobody blinks, right? Because if 2 people would have put their hands up, I think all 400 would, but thankfully nobody did. I said, all right, terrific. So we all know we have some blind spots as leaders. Great. Now just take a second for me, would you, and just write down what they are. Now here's the trick, because everyone was shuffling their feet and looking rather sheepish, because what are your leadership blind spots, John? You probably don't know what they are, because if you did know what they were, there wouldn't be blind spots, right? So that's the other thing that journaling helps, is to develop these blind spots. And one of the things that we say is, look, take an assessment, take an objective assessment, not a subjective assessment. Typically what happens, John, let's say you took one of our assessments, which you can get on our website. I'll talk about that later. But let's say you took one of our assessments. Let's pretend for a second that you have really good self-awareness, okay? You would look at this assessment that talks about all of your leadership skills, attributes, all your proclivities, all of that kind of stuff, right? Competencies, capabilities as a leader, into broken down by people development, strategy development, company development, all of that good stuff, right? If you had good self-awareness, you would look at this assessment and you go, yeah, that's probably me. Yeah, I need to work on this, I need to work on that, I need to work on the other. But let's pretend for a second you had really poor self-awareness. And the assessment said, you need to work on all of these things. What would you say if you had really poor self-awareness, do you imagine?
I probably would think that I don't need to work on those things. I'm doing pretty good.
I think I'm terrific.
Yeah.
So every time we have our leaders do an assessment before we put them in our program, those that have really low self-awareness, we think, oh, crikey, this is going to be an uphill struggle to start with, but we'll be able to help these people the most quickly. And those that have got very high self-awareness, it's very easy because they go, yeah, that's probably me. And those that have got poor self-awareness, are you married, John?
I am.
But let's imagine then that you were married and you thought you were perfect in nearly every conceivable way, right? Would say, well, just go and show this to Mrs. Ruder. See what Mrs. Ruder says, right? And then come back and let's have a chat. And then typically they come back and say, yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. My wife said this is exactly me. So back to your original question. What does journaling give you? It gives you the mechanism to build your self-awareness, to everyday focus on. So it's not a to-do list. It's taking these core elements of leadership, as people development, company development, strategy development, leadership development, all of those kind of things, and intentionally, systematically, every day, that's every day, work on them. Why every day? Because when you brush your teeth every day, why? Do you have children? You do have children, don't you?
I do.
Why do you make them brush their teeth every day and wash their hands before a meal and keep their room tidy? And
you're developing habits, right?
You're developing habits, you're developing beliefs. And if you get all those good habits, do you have daughters? I
have two sons, one daughter. Yeah.
Okay. So by the time they're I got 4, right? So by the time they're 18, if you give good values and good habits and good beliefs into these little creatures that are running around in the world, by the time they're 18 and they go out into the big bad world and, encounter situations they're not entirely sure what to do with, if you've given them all those good values, good habits, good behaviors, good beliefs, good conceptual attitudes and so on, then they'll do well. And if you don't, well, they'll end up on America's Most Wanted, because that's how that works. So it's about developing leaders with the right habits, the right beliefs. We've got to give them an action plan. It's not just about having good beliefs, because leaders, you can't believe yourself to greatness, although Muhammad Ali did a pretty good job of it. But having said that, what did he do every day? He had really good, strong beliefs, but then every day he trained, every day he skipped rope, right? Every day. Didn't take a day off, because you can't take a day off. So it's about the right attitudes and beliefs, and journaling helps that. So the right behaviors give you a kind of a cookbook for success, and journaling does that. Then it's about the right skills and techniques. You've got to develop those. Well, you're not going to do that unless you have this good self-awareness and EQ and recognize the gaps and do something about filling them. So we have this about basically maximizing your potential. So all of your audience, all of your leaders, all of your listeners and viewers and so on, their job is to maximize their own potential and then maximize the potential of the people that work for them, because they in turn will maximize the potential of their business. And every leader's job is to future-proof their company, future-proof themselves, their people, and their company. And in your world, especially with AI, and the rate of change is just astronomical at the moment. So people did predict AI about a year or 2 years ago, and everyone was talking about it, but did we all imagine ChatGPT would change the world? Some did. Some pretty intelligent, clever people did. They had their eye on the future, but a lot of people didn't. But will the rate of change slow down, do you think? Stop? Right? Or will it just increase and go faster and faster and faster? So we're in an increasingly complex world. And as Marshall Goldsmith said, what got you here won't get you there. And I think that's more and more and more true almost on a daily, on a daily basis. I think that principle of what got you here won't get you there, and you've got to skate to where the puck's going to be and all of that good stuff. Yeah. I think that is becoming increasingly difficult. So the importance of leaders for them to get their leadership stuff together, could have said that in a worse way, is more important than ever. So that's why I wrote this third book.
So let me ask you a question when it comes to journaling and self-awareness and things like that. I'm guessing do you see a correlation between like high self-awareness and humility and low self-awareness and ego?
Sure, 100%. There is a direct correlation. The thing about self-awareness or emotional intelligence, yeah, ego is a killer everywhere, right? Everywhere. My business partner in Miami has a beautiful quote, which I love, when he's talking to sales people and sales managers particularly, but I think it applies to everything. I think it applies to leadership, also to parenting and to absolutely everything. And he says this, he says, we've always got a choice to make. And he said, you either feed your ego or you feed your children. And I think that's really nice because
that's a good one. Yeah.
If you feed your ego all the time, and that's one of the problems with leadership, no one ever comes. I don't know how many people work for you, John, but let's just imagine you got 20 or 30 people working for you, just as a number, right? When was the last time, John, right? Well, let me back up and then I'm going to ask you two questions. The first question is that what percentage of the time do you think your people tell you the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
What percentage of time? Probably not as high as I want.
Right. Nowhere near as high as you think. Right? So
hopefully half.
Yeah. Okay. So it's not zero, but then neither is it 100, right? It's somewhere in between. And I think one of the things that we have to do, each leader, we've got to first face that principle that people aren't telling us the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. What they're telling us is a version of the truth that they think is in their best interest to have you believe. So we've got this truth issue to deal with. So that's an issue. I was so impressed when George Bush Sr., I know he's no longer with us anymore, but after he stopped being the president, even though you Americans still call ex-presidents Mr. President. So I was watching TV. I was just kind of doing some channel surfing. And he hadn't been the president for a couple of years, maybe a year or so. And he was just taking place in a pro-am golf tournament. And he walked off the 18th green and somebody shoved a camera in his face and said, "Hey, Mr. President, how was the golf?" And he stopped and thought for a second, and he said, "It's amazing how many games of golf I've lost since leaving the White House," right? So think about that for a second. So how many times, John, has somebody come to your office and knocked on the door and said, "Hey, John, you got a minute?" And you say, "Yeah, come in, sit down, Bob. What's up?" Well, I just wanted to let you know, John, that I've been watching you over the last 6 months, and I think you're doing a really, really, really crappy job. I think this was bad, that was bad, this was dreadful, and that was awful. Don't ever do that again. And people are still laughing about that thing that you did in the canteen, right? Nobody tells you have an ugly baby, right? It's very difficult, especially when you sign the checks. And as I said, if I sign all of the parking spots, because they're all worried that that's going to be reflected in the next salary review. So no one's going to tell you have an ugly baby. No one's going to tell you doing a crap job. Well, so who's going to tell you? Your journal will tell you, right? This daily self-reflection that you were talking about, this daily ego check, right? I really like that as a principle. Your journal kind of can be your ego check. It can be maybe your Jiminy Cricket, perhaps, right? Who sits on your shoulder and goes, "Really? Is that your answer? Really? Is that the best you can do today?" And the thing about it every day is what happens when you every day think, how could I have done that better? How should I have done that better? Was that good leadership? Was that showing the right example? And we might have given a prompt that says something like, accountability works both ways and you encourage what you tolerate, right? So that might be a prompt that we kind of have them think about today. And then they go, "You know what? Maybe that wasn't so good." What then happens, John, is when we ask that with enough frequency, enough regularity, what then happens, coming back to your question, is the leader, instead of always at the end of the night thinking, how could I have done better? Should I have said this? Should I have said that? What would have been better? Maybe if I said that, maybe I could not have done this, right? You do it in the moment. So you kind of measure twice and cut once, because one of the things about emotional intelligence is something that we call impulse control, right? You got to have, as a leader, you have to have good impulse control. You can't just fly off the handle when something bad happens, because what happens then is everybody gets really terrified. Everybody gets terrified. Creativity goes down, blame culture, silos. And you know that percentage of the truth that you think is at 50%? Now it's at 45%. And then it's at 40, and then it's at 35, and then it's at 30. So, yeah, in answer to your question. Good question.
Let me ask you this then. So we get in the habit of journaling, on a daily basis, and we start discovering things. Do we ever have a time period where we're supposed to go back and review those journals and read up on them and see like how far we've come?
Yeah, all the time. And one of the things that, you're not going to like this, because we have a terrific platform, and we've got LMS is all on your phone, and it's all that great jazzy stuff. We've got a brilliant app, and everybody tracks stuff. But we actually, okay, so this is where you're going to go, okay, bye, and click me off, right? We actually, and this isn't going to sit well with the IT geeks, I promise you, we want you to do all of this by hand. We want you to get a really nice journal. We have these tremendous handmade Italian hand-stitched leather journals and fountain pens, carbon, and all gorgeous Bentley type stuff. But we actually want you to write the stuff out by hand. And there's loads of research for why writing by hand. And I know half of your audience have now just turned off and gone, sod that. I'm going to go cut the hedges, right? Rather than type, there's so much research into why that's better. But also, we give you a place to store these things over time. If I look at my shelf over here, I've got hundreds of these over time, and you always go back and see how far you come because you don't see it on a daily basis. I saw a brilliant video by Simon Sinek just a couple of months ago who talked about it doesn't make sense to go to the gym. Did you see that video by Simon?
No, I didn't.
So he said, imagine that for whatever reason, you decide you want to get fitter or healthier or drop pounds or increase muscle mass or, stamina or flexibility. You decide you're going to go to the gym. So, okay, so you made this decision, you're going to go to the gym. So you stand in front of the mirror, completely naked on day one, right? And you have a good look at yourself, right? And then you go to the gym, put some clothes on, then you go to the gym and you bend and stretch and sweat and all of that kind of stuff. And you really work diligently and hard, okay? You sweat like a lunatic. Then you come home. And then the next day you look in the mirror again and you look exactly the same as yesterday, right? So, all right, so you make yourself go again and you look in the mirror again and you look exactly the same again and you think, what's the point of this? Which is why you'll go to the gym. Well, it's one of the things we talk about in the book, right? How many people have said they're going on a New Year's resolution, going to go to the gym, and you go to the gym, to your normal gym on the 4th of January, and it's packed. You got to wait 20 minutes to go onto an orbital, right? One of those, or a rowing machine. You got to wait 20 minutes because it's the 4th of January. What does it look like on the 4th of April?
Empty.
It's empty, yeah, right? So most people, it's why in my first book, I said, why do most guitars end up on eBay? So you buy a guitar and you think, I'm going to be the next, I don't know, fill in the blank, Leiden or whatever, right? And then you try some chords and your fingers hurt and you try something else and you watch a few YouTube videos and before you know, you leave it in the corner and it's been there for a week and then you'll give it another go and then before you know, it's in the spare room and then before you know, it's on top of the wardrobe and then before you know, it's on eBay, right? And it's the same with the gym membership, right? Because these things compound over time. It doesn't make sense to go to the gym one day, but it does make sense to go to the gym for 6 months. It does make sense to go to the gym for 2 years. And you'll see the difference after maybe 3 months. But for the first 3 months, you don't see a lot of difference. So the beauty of keeping a journal handwritten as opposed to electronic, which disappears into the ether, is you can very easily reach out, go back and go, crikey, what a lunatic I was 3 years ago thinking that was the right solution to that tricky problem. And now, because you've developed and you can lift different weights and you're more flexible and whatever, you'll make better decisions over time.
Yeah, I think that's really good. Do you, when it comes to journaling and looking back on it, when you're writing these things down in the moment, you mentioned sometimes that people with poor self-awareness are sometimes the ones that have the biggest impact. Do you find that they write things down early on in the journey that are, oh, I did this great, and aren't writing about the things that they didn't do great, or are they becoming more aware of that over time?
100% of the time. Not like 80% of the time or 90% of the time. Invariably. So what we do when we do the assessment, we won't take anyone as a client that doesn't do an assessment. So they do an assessment and we tell them, you listen, you're terrific in these areas, da 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 da. And the thing about self-awareness and EQ, which we all know is a much, much stronger predictor of success than IQ, technical skill or experience, there is nothing compared to EQ. Coca-Cola did that first big study, I think, in the late 80s. So that's kind of where the whole EQ thing came from. But when we do this assessment and we tell them specifically where their weaknesses are, we say, you're great at this stuff, this stuff, this stuff, and this stuff. But the good news is about EQ is you can develop it. Like IQ, let's pretend that your IQ is 162, John. It was 162 when you were 11. It's 162 now, and it'll be 162 in 3 years' time, even if you read 15 books a week, right? Because your EQ is kind of stamped on, your IQ is kind of stamped on your DNA, but your EQ you can develop. And if we, instead of saying to everybody, listen, try and get better everywhere, that's just a big ask. So we would say to you, for example, if you were a member, if you became a client of ours, here are the 5 areas that if you concentrate on those 5 things, will make a significant difference in the shortest period of time, rather than just try and be all things to everybody, right? So we're very, very laser targeted with our clients, because so we do this assessment, we check out their EQ. Those with low EQ, it's a fight, it's a struggle. We're constantly beating them up. And those with high EQ and self-awareness go, all right, let me at it. I'm in for it. And they're converts from day one. And most of our business is recommendation. I can't think, we don't do any advertising on Facebook. We don't spend any money on advertising at all. It's all recommendation. What we're doing now, I love it. Anyway, it's the only marketing that we do. We send people to have a read of the book. And if you like the book, check out the website. And if you like that, get assessed. If you like that, let's have a chat.
I think that's really good. So if someone wants to connect with you online, maybe become a client, pick up a copy of your book and do one of those assessments, how do they do that? How do they connect with you?
Well, the book is, I nearly said you can get it at Amazon. You can get it at Amazon, you can get it anywhere, Barnes & Noble, anywhere. So it's available in print, electronic, audio. And this book did the audio myself because I couldn't bear an American voice doing English jokes in my book. So I narrated this book, and I'll narrate. I have a contract for another 2 books, and I'll narrate those 2 too. So there's that. And then you can go. So it's just Antonio Garrido or My Daily Leadership. That's the name of this book, My Daily Leadership. Or go to all the W's, mydailyleadership.com. There's loads of free resources in there. There's a link for the assessment. There's a business health check. There's a leadership health check. There's lots of stuff. Just check all that out, or write to me, and I promise I'll get back to you pretty quickly. It is Antonio at My Daily Leadership, or one word, Antonio at mydailyleadership.com, and I'll help you out, whoever you are, on whatever question you've got.
Awesome. And I'll link that too in the show notes at geekleader.com, so people can go there and click right on through to your website, your book, and things like that. Really appreciate having you on. I think you're dead spot on about the ideas of journaling and looking back on it and how that affects, leadership and ego and all that good stuff. So thank you.
John?
I'm going to.
Yeah. And you're not a 16-year-old Victorian schoolgirl, so hurrah.
Right. All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you. See you soon.
Hope you enjoyed the show. Please go to geekleader.com to learn more about what this guest is up to, click on their links, and connect with them online. I would also greatly appreciate it if you could leave me a rating and review in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to the show. And make sure you've subscribed if you haven't already. And if you feel so inclined, you can leave me a tip by going to geekleader.com/tip.